Good evening, Charleston. I am Patricia Williams Lessane. I am the Executive Director of the College of Charleston's Avery Research Center and one of the co-PIs on the Race and Social Justice Initiative. On behalf of President Steve Osborne, Provost Brian McGee, Dean John White, who is co-PI on the Race and Social Justice Initiative, and Darren Calhoun, who many of you have gotten to know while he was working in his previous position as coordinator of the Race and Social Justice Initiative, I thank the organizers of the Charleston Forum for seeing the value in our work, namely the production of the State of Racial Disparities in Charleston County, 2000 to 2015, and for using it as a centerpiece for this year's conversation. I would like to recognize Google, and more specifically Lylan Hester, for springing to action when the world was reeling after the murders at Mother Emanuel. Lylan, your leadership, generosity, and vision are as colossal as the digital universe through which Google allows us to travel at any moment at the speed of light with just the touch of a keypad. Thank you so much, and I pray that we have been good stewards of the gifts you have given us. I'd also like to thank our other donors who make this report a reality. SunTrust Bank, who has been with Avery since 2011, supporting us at every turn. The Avery Institute, one of our co-parents, if you will. The advocacy of the Avery Institute solidified the Avery Research Center's home at the College of Charleston, ensuring its long-term stability and longevity. I'd like to also thank the South Carolina Community Loan Fund for its generosity and leadership under visionary Michelle Mapp, Starbucks, as well as a philanthropist and social justice advocate Linda Kettner for giving us the opportunity to make sure that the Disparities report got into as many hands as possible. This report would not have been possible without the genius of Dr. Stacy Patton, who conducted the research and wrote much of the report. Dr. Patton's copious research gave me a deep well of data to draw from as I developed the policy recommendations and benchmarks you find at the end of the report. To be sure, this was a huge team effort and would not have been possible without the commitment to social justice from the Avery Research team. So I'd like to publicly thank Ms. Savannah Frierson, David Rothsman, Darren Calhoun, Deborah Wright, as well as Denise Ciccarelli in the Office of Institutional Advancement at the College of Charleston. This report and our work at RSJI is done humbly and courageously in the memories of Walter Scott, the Emanuel Nine, and also in the memory of our beloved colleague and sister, Dr. Consuela Francis, who was one of the original co-PIs co-PIs at RSJI. When I am frequently asked to speak about why we decided to do this report, my answer is simple. And here I use an adage from one of our local revolutionaries, Dr. Millicent E. Brown. Somebody had to do it. And that's the truth. For years prior to the tragedy at Mother Emanuel, friends and allies of mine had been gathering in coffee shops, over dinner, on street corners to discuss what we were seeing and feeling here in Charleston. The disappearing Black presence on the peninsula, the increasing marginalization of Black life, the challenge to find consistent quality education for Black children, and the overall lack of income mobility that all of us were experiencing regardless of our credentials, professional experiences, or work ethic. If these were problems that we as Black professionals were facing, what was life like for those of us on whose door opportunity had not knocked? And then the two tragedies occurred in 2015. Like all of you here, we were rocked to our core by the senseless loss of so many lives. And at the very same time, we were spiritually convicted. We could no longer go about life as it was. Now everyone knew that there was a problem in the Holy City. So when Google approached us, we wanted to do something meaningful. We knew that bringing important thought leaders and social justice advocates advocates to Charleston was important, but we also wanted to make sure our work left an indelible mark on the community and hopefully, prayerfully, move the needle in a collective effort to make the city and the county racially inclusive places. To be sure, this work builds on and supports the work of other activists and advocacy groups, such as CAJM, which has been leading the charge in the areas of policing, youth employment, and affordable housing. The Illumination Project, which has reached over 700 local residents, engaged them in dialogue around policing, public safety, and individual rights. And the Social Justice Racial Equity Collaborative, which did a yeoman's job of drafting the City of Charleston's resolution to recognize, denounce, and apologize for its role in slavery. We see this Disparities report as an exegesis of this historical moment we find ourselves in here in Charleston. Because its empirical findings are rooted in history and buttressed by raw data, it is a deliberate and detailed roadmap for collective freedom so that we don't get mired down in the minutia of conversation, but rather use it as a springboard for action. This report continues the conversation on race and racism in this region by using a racial equity lens. In recent years, a racial equity lens has been used in many fields to identify injustice and structural barriers people of color face in education, employment, housing, healthcare, and even philanthropy. At the same time, using a racial equity lens is essential to the creation of a fair and just society. This report specifically identifies policies, practices, and structural arrangements of power that maintain a social environment where Black residents are overwhelmingly impacted by pervasive inequities in education, employment, housing, gentrification, public health, and racialized violence. The findings paint a bleak picture of intrinsic obstacles Black residents face daily, making it virtually impossible in some cases to break free of cycles of poverty, criminalization, and incarceration. Because these inequities have a direct correlation to the legacy of slavery and the turbulent aftermath of Reconstruction, both of which not only shaped the racial climates of the 19th and 20th century, as well as the socioeconomic landscape of our nation, a racial equity lens is most fitting to chart a course to right the wrongs of the past. The data illuminates the social, The data illuminates the social and economic conditions disproportionately impacting the county's Black population, particularly in the wake of rapid gentrification that is outpacing and outpricing longtime Black residents in the downtown peninsula. What you find in the report is reflected in national trends impacting Black people's abilities to be self-sufficient, to move up and find quality education for their children, because the income to neighborhood to public education paradigm is skewed in favor of whites over Blacks and other communities of color. In other words, one's wealth or lack thereof determines where one lives, the opportunities that may or may not be found there, but especially the type of education one receives. And when you factor in the challenges Black people have historically faced to the path to home ownership, compounded by a lack of income mobility, then you have a system that perpetuates wealth disparities. Just this week, a Washington Post article highlighted the city of Charleston as one of the places where low-income households would see a 26% increase in their monthly rents. The story highlighted a woman named Ebony Morris, whose rent is set to almost double from that of $403 to $600 a month. The article goes further saying, quote, Charleston, South Carolina is second only to Washington, D.C. in potential dollar increases in rent. In both Charleston and the United States, housing prices are rapidly outpacing incomes, putting the poorest workers at risk of homelessness. By eliminating subsidies for dependents and child care costs, rent increases will disproportionately impact families, end quote. The findings in our report, to be sure, are daunting, but they are not insurmountable. It includes a series of policy recommendations to begin the work of making the city and county and the city of Charleston and Charleston County more racially equitable places for all its residents. Some of them come from best practices developed in other counties and cities who have courageously embarked upon this mission. However, many of them I developed with the city of Charleston and Charleston County's unique histories and current state in mind. And a few of these strategies and recommendations should be going up there right now. You can just look at them, and if you want the report, we have them for you. Addressing the disparities highlighted in this report will require a multi-pronged approach and partnership. We hope this report will serve as a useful planning tool and guide for activists, city leaders, community planners, and local agencies, ultimately as an instrument of positive and measurable change. We believe that the best strategy toward creating healthier and more racially equitable communities is to invest in the lives of all its residents. Before I close, I want to remind you of several historic events that took place some 50 years ago. The similarities between the tenor, the tone, and the cultural and political time of those events and this present moment are undeniable. It was in 1968 that the first interracial kiss made its debut on American television when Captain James T. Kirk and Uhuru locked lips in an episode titled Plato's Children, sparking xenophobia, outrage, and anger across American TV land. It was in that same year that both Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated as they tried to move the country towards racial equity and peace. In that very same year, the Fair Housing Act was signed into law, which is rapidly coming undone by legislation that has no regard for the least amongst us. In that same year, American Olympic athletes Tommie Smith and John Carlos raised fists in the Black Power salute in Mexico City, much like the recent protest of former NFL player Colin Kaepernick and his supporters in response to police brutality against African Americans. But perhaps the eeriest similarity between 1968 and this year was that that year the Kerner Report was published, which found that the race riots of the 1960s were a result of Black frustration at lack of economic opportunities and emphasized white racism was responsible for the rioting and rebellion by frustrated Black Americans. The report's most famous passage warned, quote, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one Black, one white, separate and unequal." In closing, before I introduce the first panel of dynamic speakers, I would like to acknowledge the work of Black women in the social justice movement here in Charleston who have stood on the shoulders of Septima Clark and our very own living legend, Lucille Whipper, and who have the knowledge, drive, and skill set to change this city and make it the great place with the legacy that all of us can be proud of. These women include Michelle Mapp, Dr. Millicent Brown, Chandra Scott, Sherry Snipes-Williams, Letitia Von Brandon, Dr. Lou Robertson, Ruth Taylor, Bria Danzigler, Lanesa Clarkson, and Melissa Maddox Evans. Black women have always been the bulwark of progress in this nation, from the suffragist movement, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, Black power, gay rights, and Black Lives Matter. We've toiled on behalf of all people. Look to these women, not just for your ideas and what you think Charleston needs and what you think Black people need, but turn to them because they know what Charleston and what their community needs. And they have the spirit, the strength, and the wisdom of their ancestors at their backs, propelling them forward. Lastly, tonight after the forum is over and you are feeling inspired, energized, and as the young people say, woke, when you are tucked safely in your beds, instead of processing what you've heard here tonight from your place of privilege, because all of us gathered here today have varying degrees of privilege, close your eyes and imagine, if you're a white ally, Imagine that those experiences of the people, imagine what life must be like for Black people in Charleston. But more importantly, imagine that those experiences are yours, that when you look around, you are surrounded by a sea of faces that don't look like yours. Visualize your children in subpar schools and food deserts. Look up at the ceiling and contemplate what it would take for you to break free of the cycle of poverty when your rent is about to go up almost 30%, and you make less than a living wage, but you have dreams for a better life for yourself and your children. What kind of lifeboat would you need so that instead of being given a few fish to eat, you now had a fishing boat so that you could row towards self-sufficiency? Whatever that looks like in your meditation, resolve that that is what you are committed to doing to make sure that everyone, every Charleston resident has a seat at Opportunity's table. Doing anything short of this will be wasting your seat at the table. Thank you.